I've clicked onto the global tropical overview for October the 9th, 2023. As is always the case in these videos, the athletics pressure are mine alone, and when making decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look towards your local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So there's a lot going on in the Pacific today, and really this week we've got two significant land threats taking place. We've got tropical storm, probably by now Typhoon Bolaven, and Tropical Storm Lidia off the coastline of Mexico. I'm going to leave a timestamp to Lidia, so if you want to skip ahead to that, you can, because I'm going to start in the West Pacific, and we're not going to waste any more time. We're just going to get right into it. So I'm going to pause the infrared loop here for a moment, because the development over the past several hours with Bolaven has been very key to what we are expecting it to do as it comes towards the Mariana Islands over the next 12 hours or so. I'm going to go back to earlier in this loop. This is around 18 UTC. There we go, UTC time. And you can see that by this time, we had a CDO develop, or central dense overcast, over the low-level center. And by this point, the question would have been, how much is this convection developing the system? There were some signs that this convection was trying to wrap around the low-level center, but exactly how well developed was the center, not exactly sure. That was until we got a microwave pass, and I'm very zoomed into this. This was earlier this afternoon. You can see the time there if you need to see it. But I've zoomed in here because this is a very small signature that we're seeing on this microwave pass. So what we had, this was just before that 18 UTC frame that I showed you. You can see that we have this strong band of convection here on the south side of what appears to be the low-level center. And this is pretty concerning because this looks like a developing eye wall right here. And this, if this closes off, this may be a very, very compact eye, and this might be what you would call pinhole eye. And that's simply that on satellite, when the eye clears out, it looks like a pinhole on satellite imagery. And that's why we call it these very small eyes pinholes. Now, the main important thing to watch for after this microwave image came out was, how did the convection develop after this point? And unfortunately, the news is that we're seeing some pretty well-developed convective activity here around this structure. You could see that we've now, in the most recent hours, this is around 21 UTC, the convection has now come out of the CDO phase, and now we're into more of a curved band phase wrapping fully around this inner core structure. This is why I said it's probably a typhoon by now. And what I think is happening is now all this deep convection that was south of this apparent eye on this microwave run, or this microwave imagery, is now trying to wrap around this entire thing and now complete its eye wall. So the question is now, has it done so? Has it already gotten pretty close to closing off its eye wall? We are seeing signs that that might be occurring now. This is radar out of Guam. This is one of the nice things of having radar out here. And you can see the development without microwave and stuff. I'm going to zoom in here into the inner core, and you can see, I'm going to try and outline this to the best of my ability, but my pen is a bit offset from my screen to what you all are seeing, but you can see the general eye here. And if you look on the western end, and I'll pause this at the end, you can see this area of higher reflectivity being shown on the western end. What I think this is this is that convection wrapping around the western side of the eye, and this is the eye wall developing further. And of course, we'll have to see exactly how the eye wall looks when the eastern part of the eye comes in. It's a little bit too far away from the radar site to really get a good idea of things. Really, the most important thing there is to see, is some of the easterly shear impacting the system taking a bit of a toll on it. There is some shear, and I'll switch back to the water vapor loop so you all can see that. If you look here east of the system, ignore the upper level cirrus, look beneath that, you can see some of these cloud elements below the outflow layer coming towards Bolaven, indicating some easterly shear. There's some possibility, because this is a very compact storm, and I've talked about this several times with compact storms, that compact storms are very fragile in nature. They can ramp up very quickly, but they can quickly be disrupted by environmental conditions of dry air and or wind shear in this case. And you can see some of these cloud elements moving towards the storm. Now, soundings from the GFS and the European depict this shear being fairly light. The GFS is the weaker out of the two. You can see not very strong at all. The max shear value is only about 7 knots. That's not very impactful at all. And the European is a little bit stronger, 10 knots on the mean shear and 13 knots as the max shear. But, excuse me, the European has been continuously overdoing, it looks like, the wind shear. It in its last run had wanted shear right now to be about 15 to 20 knots. It has downtrended on that shear for now. So I think for now the shear has been much weaker than the European had expected. So and the shear is also expected to further lighten up on the model, I believe, from its latest run. So really there's not much to stop this except for some internal factors from developing further and intensifying potentially significantly on final approach to the Mariana Islands. Now, the good news is here, there is a little bit of time here that the system has to come towards the Mariana Islands. We're not talking about this system having a couple days to really ramp up very quickly like storms have in the past before the Mariana Islands. This system is probably about 12 hours or less away from coming through the Mariana Island chain. So we're not expecting this system to, I'd say, explode into, say, a super typhoon, but the system, if it plays its cards right, could absolutely ramp up pretty quickly. And we might be looking at more significant impacts wind and storm surge wise if the system does intensify more. And we're just going to have to really watch how the system internally develops. We'll have to keep an eye on the shear. We'll have to keep an eye on exactly how it develops on radar and microwave imagery. And those will be key to exactly how bad the impacts may be here in the Mariana Islands. Now, if there is more good news, if I go back to radar, the general track here from the storm on radar has generally been a little bit north of due west. If it does keep this up, it's possible that the system could make this gap here between Rota and Saipan. And if it does so, because of this inner core being so compact, you could see the storm's main winds associated with the eye missing the majority of the population here in the Mariana Islands. It's pretty unlikely that any area will get fully away from getting the strong winds associated with the core, but we might be able to minimize it if the storm does come in between these islands here. But of course, things can change here. This is still several hours out. This system's eye can wobble around, and that could get it closer to Rota. It could get it even closer to Saipan and Tinian. There's just that little bit of uncertainty here that will always be a bit of uncertainty with these tropical cyclones, just given some of the uncertainty with their wobbling that can take place. Now, in terms of overall steering, we're going to go to the 500 millibar chart from the GFS. You can see we have the subtropical ridge placed north. This is going to keep the system tracking generally towards the Mariana Islands, but as the system passes through there, we have a trough that's going to be digging in over Japan, and this will begin eroding the western end of this subtropical ridge. So now you've got this ridge here placed more northeast of the system alongside this trough trying to pull the system north, and this general pattern promotes a recurvature into the tropical and even subtropical West Pacific. Now, alongside this trough helping recurve it, it's also going to bring a fairly favorable jet interaction, one of the more favorable ones that we've seen this year, and you can see that take place in the GFS. As the system comes north through the Mariana Islands, this jet streak takes shape, and this is a very strong jet streak. In fact, at times, the models have been showing this jet streak at max having winds of 170 knots at peak, aloft. That's that's pretty strong overall. And given the very strong winds accelerating away from Bolaven, and given that the outflow is likely able to meet up with this jet streak and accelerate very far away from the storm, this will likely aid the system in rapid deepening. And you can see that very strong jet streak there on the GFS model there. And it intensifies it pretty quickly, getting it to a very strong intensity. And some of the intensity guidance is pretty strong on here. Even I think the HAFS model, NOAA's new hurricane model that's taking over from the HWRF in the West Pacific, that is forecasting, I believe, the system to get to super typhoon strength, and the Joint Typhoon Warning Center even forecasts that as well. And the good news is here, there's not a lot of land in its way here. You can see if I go to the cone from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, it is sort of coming between this northern part of the Mariana Island chain and this island chain I can't remember the name of, well southeast of Japan. So it is sort of making that gap, which is some good news there. But of course, there will also be significant surf impacts, not only in these islands, but also across the Philippines, China, Taiwan, and Japan as the system strengthens out to sea. Now, after it peaks, likely later this week, it will become or likely transition into a non-tropical cyclone. And there is possibility that this system could become a pretty powerful non-tropical cyclone as it comes towards Alaska next week, though I'm not really going to be talking about that as I really focus on tropical cyclones. But for those in Alaska, make sure you stay tuned to the National Weather Service there for the latest updates on what may happen here as Bolaven comes north. Now, this is the wind probability of tropical storm force winds, and you can see very high odds here. Like I said, it's pretty unlikely for any area to get away with no real strong winds from the storm. It's pretty likely either way. Here's the chances of typhoon force winds. You can see the most significant chances here being in Tinian and Saipan and Rota. Hopefully we get the system to track in between those islands and we avoid the worst of the winds, but that's not a guarantee right now. So make sure if you're in the islands of Guam and Rota and Tinian and Saipan particularly, you stay tuned to local emergency management and National Weather Service in Guam so you can stay up to date on what is happening with Bolaven, and you can get your preparations completed now as the system comes through. All right, we're now going to move to the East Pacific as we have Tropical Storm Lidia to talk about. This is our first real significant hurricane threat that I can remember this year to Mexico. And it makes sense this time of year you start to get more storms trying to recurve into the coastline of Mexico. And this system is similar to Bolaven to where it's going to have a jet interaction that will likely aid some intensification. And some of that intensification, like I said a couple days ago, may be significant. So if you look at the current visible satellite imagery, there's not a lot of deep convection over the center, but there are some signs that the system is trying to develop. If you look at the microwave path we got way earlier this morning, you can see this large curved band structure developing around the inner core. And we did have a recon plane go into the storm earlier. I believe they did report a ragged eye wall developing around the core, and they also found the pressure slightly lowering between the two passes that they did, and they found winds still around 70, maybe 75 miles per hour. Now, the environment overall is getting a little bit more favorable. Up until now, the system has been sheared from the east, but you can see now the easterly shear is pretty much gone. You can see all this upper level cirrus expanding away from Lidia. And alongside that, you can see over Mexico, all this upper level cirrus now accelerating away towards the east at a quick pace. And this is that jet streak taking shape. And you can see that here's an upper trough that's digging in over Baja California. And here's the jet streak associated with it. Now, over the next, say, 6 to 12 hours, this is really going to become more optimal for Lidia. You can see the storm position here on the GFS relative to this trough, and here's your entrance region to that jet. And this will allow, in a similar fashion to Bolaven, allow its outflow to accelerate away from the storm very quickly, and that can aid pretty quick deepening. You can see that take place here in the GFS. Now, exactly how deep it gets, that's been very uncertain over the past several days. These type of interactions can be very fickle, and the European has been one model to consistently be much weaker with this interaction overall, though the European has also been much weaker throughout its runs on exactly how strong Lidia got. But something that this recon did depict is that the European was more correct here relative to the GFS in its intensification throughout the day today. Last night, the GFS wanted the system to be intensifying pretty substantially by now, and really we're not seeing that, at least from this recon data. The pressure was only slightly dropping between the two passes. So we may not be looking at, an overly strong system like we may expect with Bolaven, but it still may intensify at a pretty quick rate. Just because the system is not a hurricane right now doesn't mean it's probably not going to be a hurricane when it comes into Mexico. And there's room here still that this system could be very strong. We've seen several cases before to where these jet interactions can really help a system ramp up very quickly. There have been countless examples of this. We've had several this year. Hurricane Idalia in the Gulf of Mexico, that was a jet interaction. And we also had Cyclone Mocha earlier this year. That was a jet interaction, and those two helped those storms intensify very quickly before they came ashore. And there is room here for this system to intensify very quickly. Now, as it stands, this is the National Hurricane Center forecast cone, the latest one, and you can see the system intensifying into a hurricane here. Max winds are forecast to be at about 100 miles per hour. That's about 85 knots. Could get stronger than that, but it also could weaken a little bit from its peak intensity as it comes ashore, as the jet interaction is going to start weakening overall. As Lidia makes its final approach to landfall, and shear may take over a little bit, but there is still the likelihood of a significant hurricane coming in here into Mexico. And of course, you don't need a Category 3 or Category 4 hurricane, remember, to have a significant storm, especially with the high topography here. Even if you have a Category 1 hurricane coming in here, you can get a lot of significant rainfall in a very short period of time, and a lot of storm surge as well, especially along the coastline. But you can see the hurricane warning in place in red with a tropical storm warning surrounding it. And make sure you stay in tune to the National Hurricane Center and your local weather office in the coastline of Mexico as the system moves in. And interests in the United States, particularly on the Gulf Coast, should also pay attention to the National Weather Service and the Weather Prediction Center, as the system's remnants will be coming northwards and interacting, I believe, with another system currently in the Bay of Campeche that might also develop into a tropical cyclone, and that may lead to some flooding issues along the coastline there, though it looks like a lot of that rain might be more beneficial than not. But I'll leave links to the National Hurricane Center, the local weather office in Mexico, and National Weather Service in the US and Guam in the description, as I typically do. And I hope everyone stays safe in Mexico and the Mariana Islands as Bolaven and Lidia come through. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching.